Hello, football fans, and welcome to a special edition of MVP Sports. Yesterday, Mark came out with our first team preview, previewing the St. Louis Rams. We're continuing our quest through the NFC West, and I have with me a special guest, Mitch from 12thmanrising.com, coming in to be our Seahawks expert. Mitch, how you doing this fine evening?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
No problem. We're going to be talking some Seahawks, and I just want to say congratulations on the Super Bowl. And in the off season, do you feel a little inklings like people are going to have a target on your back?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a great season last season, but it was definitely a season where I think everybody was kind of like, the Seahawks aren't really going to get there. They're not really going to beat the Broncos, but now they're for real, and I think the rest of the league sees that. So definitely they are the hunted rather than the hunter this year.
Well, let's start with the draft that you guys had. And after I watched all the draft coverage, it seemed like Mel Kiper and some of the analysts, Gil Brandt, Scout on NFL.com, all the analysts were kind of down on the Seahawks draft, where it was, if you look at their draft, it's nothing completely sexy, at least to me. You as a Seahawks fan, what did you like about the Seahawks draft? What did you not like about their draft?
You brought up the word sexy, and I think that a lot of experts looked at that draft as they have the last couple years and said, I didn't really like it. I don't know what the Seahawks are thinking, but the Seahawks have always found a way to find that diamond in the rough player that nobody else really saw coming. I really like the Paul Richardson pickup. I think he is very underlooked and very underrated. As a student at ASU, I got to see him play at Colorado in the Pac-12. He's a great player. I mean, I had my eye on him. I didn't think the Seahawks would go after him, but he's a great player, and he can fit in where Golden Tate left. And he is that speedy receiver that the Seahawks can use alongside Sidney Rice, Doug Baldwin, Percy Harvin. A lot of those guys. I liked the draft. I really did. The only player I wasn't too sure on was Kevin Pierre-Louis out of Boston College as a linebacker. Now looking back, I'm kind of like, okay, I see what the Seahawks did there. They're trying to get ready to fill in for Bobby Wagner and Malcolm Smith in the next couple of seasons. But, when I first saw that pick, I didn't really know what they were thinking. I was like, that guy's just going to make it as a special teams player. But now, as I have the last couple of years, you look at it, you analyze it. It's hard to really say how the draft is going to go except for the next couple of years. But I'm definitely excited. A lot of great guys coming in and a lot of guys that have a great chance to make that team.
Well, and the one thing that I have to ask about, because if you guys can't see, I have a Viking shirt on, and it's actually a Percy Harvin Viking shirt. One question I'm going to ask you about the draft is, you're watching round one, and you get to the Seahawks pick, and you're like, oh, who are they going to draft? And they trade the pick to my Vikings to get Teddy Bridgewater. As a Seahawk fan, what were you thinking? Were you like, why did you trade that pick away? Or were you like, I could see what they're doing?
At first, I was like, darn it, I just waited 4 hours for you guys to trade that pick. Are you kidding me? I spent 3 months doing mock drafts on who the Seahawks were going to pick up in that first round, and they trade the pick. It was frustrating. But looking back, now I do understand what they were doing. They were just really picking up on all of the late round picks. And a lot of their successful guys have been those late round picks. Richard Sherman was a 5th round pick. Malcolm Smith was a 7th round pick. Russell Wilson was a 3rd round pick. All of these superstars on that team, they weren't like, first round guys. They were all late round picks. So at first I was really frustrated. I was kind of angry, especially like I said, I'd skip dinner to sit there and watch the draft to see them skip that pick. But looking back, I think it was probably the best decision. They were going to take Richardson with that pick anyway, and they ended up getting him in the 2nd round. So it worked out for everybody. Your Vikings got Teddy Bridgewater.
I was so happy for that. You don't even know.
That's a good pickup for you guys, definitely.
And one of the things that I'm going to just ask you, getting away from the draft, we talked about it on the Onside Kick podcast on NFLSpinZone.com. about what Patrick Peterson, Arizona Cardinal defensive back, said about Richard Sherman, how he's not a shutdown corner. Oh, I could do the same thing if I was in that system. When you heard Peterson's comments, what were you thinking as a Seahawks fan? Like, come on, really?
Yeah, I was thinking, well, it's not going to be long before Richard Sherman has something to say about this. Peterson is a great player. Definitely respect the guy for what he does on the field. It's not some nobody that's making those comments. He's a great player. It's hard to say, which one is better based on who would be better on which team and what team. That's all hypothetical. If you look at the stats, which is of course what Richard Sherman did, he posted that even though he's the least targeted corner in the NFL, he's had the most interceptions the last 3 seasons combined, with 20. And Peterson isn't really anywhere near close in that category. So, when you look at the fact that Sherman's always there to make big plays, you go back early into the season when the Seahawks looked like they were going to lose to the Texans in overtime. Richard Sherman came up with a big old pick six. And then you look at the last play of the NFC Championship game, the tip, the immaculate deflection, if you will. That was another big play. And, would Peterson have made those plays? Who knows? That's all hypothetical. So I really just wish the two guys could be on the field at the same time. I wish, Peterson was a receiver and Sherman was a corner or vice versa to really see them duke it out that way. But, I think when you look at the stats, I think Sherman's a better corner, but Peterson is still a great corner to his own respect.
Well, and one of the questions, like I said, we talked about this on the podcast. I actually used that. I didn't call it the immaculate deflection. I like that. I kind of said that, you know what, that's my kind of example to why Richard Sherman is a shutdown corner. As a Seahawk fan, is that a good thing to look at and say, yeah, because of that he's a shutdown corner? Do you even believe he's a shutdown corner?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, I do. He's got a ridiculous amount of speed, a great amount of size, and he's like a blanket. He's all over guys all the time. And when you look at that, Colin Kaepernick said after that game, hey, if it was 6 inches this way, that would have been a touchdown, and Richard Sherman, you would have been the GOAT. The reality is it wasn't 6 inches that way, first of all. And second of all, I feel like even if it was, I feel like Sherman would have found a way to get in there. He's just so good at covering guys. And, a lot of the times his stats look a little bit deflated. Some guys, he only had like 2 or 3 tackles, in the last couple of games. That's because they only threw the ball at him like 3 or 4 times. I think he has earned the respect to be called a shutdown corner, and I certainly think he's one of the best in the game.
Well, and you kind of mentioned not a lot of teams throw to him because obviously the Legion of Boom has been such a big impact for the Seattle Seahawks. One of the things that I asked you before we went on air were some of the guys from that Legion of Boom the secondary are gone. Walter Thurman is now with the New York Giants, and Brandon Bauer he's also going to the East Coast. He's with the New England Patriots. How are these guys, their absence this year from the Seahawks, is it going to hurt the Legion of Boom, or is it just like next man up, reloaded?
At first I was a little bit concerned that it was going to hurt the Legion of Boom, but I think a lot of people forget about Byron Maxwell playing opposite Richard Sherman. That guy absolutely shut down teams. He really had some big shoes to fill, filling in for Brandon Browner. He had some really big shoes to fill, and he shut down Drew Brees twice. He shut down Peyton Manning in the Super Bowl, the same as everybody else on that defense. So I don't think the Legion of Boom is going anywhere anytime soon, especially when you've got the other 3 guys, Chancellor, Thomas, and Sherman, locked up for the next couple of years. I would have to say it's just next man up. The Seahawks also drafted Eric Pinkins out of San Diego State, who played safety in college, but they might move him over to the CB position. And that's another big guy. He's like 6'2", 6'3", is another big player that could be a great blanket coverage guy. So I'm not too concerned right now about that secondary. My bigger concern, to be quite honest, is the offensive line, although that's a whole another beast. But since we're talking about the defense, I think they're good to go for right now.
Well, let's move over to the offense. And I, on my list of questions, didn't have the offensive line as a huge question mark, but I'm a Vikings fan. Tell me why you're so concerned about the offensive line heading into this season.
after the draft, I got a little bit less concerned. I think Justin Britt is a great pickup for the Seahawks. I think he's going to fill in nicely, although he's going to have to compete with Michael Bowie for that position on the line. But really, the offensive line was the only real weakness the Seahawks had last season. It got pressured a lot. They backed up a lot. There was a lot of penalties thrown. And they really had trouble protecting their quarterback, Wilson. I mean, a lot of fans look at him and say, oh, he's a great scrambler. He's really good at scrambling. But really, I think of him more as a pass-first quarterback. He's just forced to scramble because his line caves in all the time, and then he's really forced to run around and make some big plays. But once the Seahawks get that offensive line figured out, which I think they made a really legitimate step in the right direction this offseason, I think that's a big weakness gone. And I think that once they get that improved, they're going to be even more scary than they already are.
And before we go to what I wanted to hit with the wide receivers, I'm going to throw a Russell Wilson question in for you. Are you concerned with Wilson getting to the end of his contract? I believe he has 2 more years, and after this season, he can begin to kind of renegotiate with the Seahawks about an extension. Do you think an extension is going to get done, or is this going to be a thing where it gets to the end and Seahawk fans are going to worry, like, is our quarterback going to leave us?
I would really, really hope that there's an extension getting worked up. It can be easy to say, where's that money going to come from? You've locked up Sherman, you've locked up Thomas, you locked up Michael Bennett, a lot of money getting thrown into these players. So it's like, well, where's that money going to come from? My thought is the Seahawks are going to lose a couple of other players in order to save enough money to keep Russell Wilson in Seattle for as long as possible. So I wouldn't be as concerned about keeping Wilson. I'd be more concerned about which players are going to get sacrificed so that we can get a big enough extension to satisfy this quarterback.
Well, and looking at the wide receivers, one guy that you can't throw into that sacrifice to help keep Wilson is Doug Baldwin. He gets a deal. With the wide receivers in general, you've mentioned Richardson. What kind of an impact is he going to make? Is Harvin going to stay healthy? What does the Baldwin deal mean? And then the loss of Golden Tate. I'm just going to let you go. Wide receiver core, talk.
Losing Golden Tate, that's a legitimate loss. I think looking at that, I think a lot of people were like, oh, well, the Seahawks would be fine without Golden Tate, but you can't just roll over the fact that he had such a good season last year, and he's been a very tremendous part of the Seahawks' success for the last couple of years. If Percy Harvin can stay healthy, if Sidney Rice can stay healthy, and then if Baldwin and Jermaine Kearse can perform the way they have recently, the Seahawks will be okay without Golden Tate. It's not going to be like, oh, well, yeah, they're just going to be fine and forget about him. There's some plays that really utilize Tate that they're going to have to find somebody to replace him, not to mention his punt returning skills, because now you're thinking, well, who's going to return punts for the Seahawks?
Earl Thomas, maybe?
Earl Thomas, I sure hope not. They don't need to risk the highest paid safety in the NFL getting knocked out on a punt return. But what I do hope is Paul Richardson. I think Richardson would be a great fit there as a punt returner. And that's if he can't already work his way into the rotation of one of the top 5 receivers for the Seahawks. It's not a pedestrian receiving core that, experts talked about last season. All of those guys are legitimate starters in the NFL. So I think that the team is going to be all right. I think they will be okay. I really pray Percy Harvin can stay healthy for more than 2 or 3 games at a time. But if he can, he's going to be explosive. I mean, we saw what he did in the Super Bowl, and thinking that he could bring that dynamic to the table every week is a really scary thought.
Well, not just that. I remember it was me and then Dave from MVP Sports. We're sitting here watching the Super Bowl, and of course you know who Harvin is, but it seemed like every other receiver on that Seattle team, it's like touchdown. We're like, who? Who? It's like, who's Kearse? Who's this guy? So, I mean, I felt like maybe just plug in new guys, reload. I want to ask you, though, about Richardson. You talked about him fitting a kick return role. Do you see him as a rookie fitting in maybe as a big-time wide receiver target for the Seahawks?
I don't see him fitting in as a big time, like a go-to guy, but I do see him with more playing time than I think people are going to give him credit for. I think people think, oh, well, Richardson will get a shot if somebody gets hurt or they design some plays around him. I actually think you can have everybody healthy and rotate Richardson into that system to give some guys a breather. You know what? If he can prove that, hey, chance to be on this team and start on this team, Pete Carroll will give him that shot. That's what happened. I remember going into training camp thinking Stephen Williams was going to beat out Jermaine Kearse. I'm not even really sure where Stephen Williams is now, but Kearse really upstaged him and said, "Hey, look, I deserve to be here. I belong here." And he was there week one. He started, and he was with the Seahawks all the way through. So you mentioned, I think a lot of football fans were like, "Who's Baldwin and who's Kearse?" Seahawks fans knew exactly who these guys were. We were like, "And they've been doing this for us all year." But so I think if Richardson can prove his worth in training camp and in the preseason, he has a legitimate shot to be somebody on that starting Seahawks roster.
Okay, now to get back to a guy, Richard Sherman, we talked about earlier in this video. I'm going to give you however long you want to take. Madden cover voting ends this week, I believe. Richard Sherman going up against Cam Newton. Give your best Richard Sherman Madden 15 cover pitch.
All right, so don't vote for Richard Sherman because of the Madden curse. I think Sherman's the best corner in the game. I think he's in the conversation as to be one of the best defensive players in the game. I don't know if anybody deserves it more, to be quite honest. I think he had a better season at his position than Cam Newton did. Maybe that's a little bit of Seahawks bias there, but and I don't know if the Madden curse is real, but I can't deny the fact that the last time a Seahawk was on the cover was Sean Alexander in 2007. He was coming off a career year and just had a dud of a year the next season. So, if you don't believe in jinxes and curses, then I would definitely vote for Sherman. But if you think there's even a small chance that he won't be the same Richard Sherman, I would vote for Cam Newton.
Well, the next question I'm going to go to is a general NFC question. And I believe, me personally, I've said it on the Onside Kick podcast, that this upcoming season, the NFC West is going to be the most competitive division in all of football. Of course, you've got your Seahawks and the 49ers, who are going to be, obviously, we're all assuming 1-2 in the division. But then you also have the Cardinals and Rams, who have made so many improvements this offseason. Do you, as a Seahawks fan, kind of fear a little bit that this could be a more competitive division than last year and possibly the most competitive?
Yeah, absolutely. And really, I think last year it was one of the most competitive divisions. I think people forget that the Seahawks almost lost to the Rams in St. Louis on Monday Night Football in October. I mean, that was literally a last-second goal line stand. Otherwise, the Seahawks lose that game. And the Seahawks were beat on their own turf for the first time in 2 years by the Arizona Cardinals. And they haven't beaten the 49ers in San Francisco for the last 6 or 7 seasons. So absolutely, I think the Seahawks need to go into this season saying, hey, I think our toughest opponents are in our own division. And once they figure out, I really think they have to finish 4-2 or 5-1 in that division just to win the NFC West. Because the 49ers have the exact same challenge. They're going to play the same teams twice a year. But those are not teams to just yawn at. Oh, it's just the Rams. It's not like that anymore. I actually think all 4 teams could finish at 500 or better. I think the Rams can finish in 4th. I think the Rams will probably finish in 4th place, but not because they're the worst team or anything like that. They could be 8-8 or even 9-7 and finish in 4th place in a stacked division. Then the Cardinals will be just a little bit better than that, 9-7, 10-6. I mean, it's tough luck to be a Cardinals fan if you're winning 10 games last year and miss the playoffs. I mean, that's just tough being in such a competitive division. But absolutely, I think it's the toughest division in football, and I think all 4 teams in the division know that, and I think the Seahawks definitely know that as well.
Well, and I mean, just to look at the Seahawks schedule, like we talked about it when the schedules first came out on the podcast, and of course you get the opening season game, the touchception rematch against Green Bay, but with actual refs. Week 3, you have a Super Bowl matchup in Week 3. But to me, I feel like with the Seahawks schedule, week 11 or maybe 12 to the end, depending on how KC does this year. Let's
Mm-hmm.
go 12 to the end. Arizona at home, San Francisco on the road, Philly on the road, 49ers at home, road in Arizona, home St. Louis. That's a tough stretch.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that's the kind of stretch where if you're in your Madden video game, you try to re-simulate to get a different season because you're like, wow, that's going to be tough. No, absolutely. And it doesn't help that the Seahawks have, I think it's like a week 4 bye. It's a really early
Mm-hmm.
bye week this year. So now you're looking at the fact that if they're going from, let's just say that they get all the way through those teams and clinch a first round bye, they're going from what is it, the beginning of October into the end of December without a week off. That's
October
grueling.
October 6th to December 28th.
Oh yeah, that's grueling. That's a baseball season almost. You're just out there all the time playing, and that's going to take a toll. And the fact that those tough games come at the end of the year when these guys are going to be fatigued, that's going to be a real test of endurance. Hey, can you, we know you can sprint off to a good start maybe, but can you keep up that long distance running to finish and get to that finish line strong? It's going to be a real test, and no one can say the Seahawks didn't earn their spot in the playoffs this season if they
Well,
make it that far.
well, and I like how you say the Seahawks earned a spot because one of the things that I remember Mark from the podcast saying is looking at this schedule, he's like, well, you know what? You're the best team from last year. You should have the hardest schedule. As a Seahawk fan, do you believe that?
Sure, I think that's fair. Absolutely, and I think that if you can play and you know that you're the best team and well, we didn't just get lucky, then you should look at that as that's a challenge. Hey, let's do it again. And you know what? Now that we have an even tougher schedule, so to speak, let's really prove to the doubters. Because there's a lot of people that think, maybe the Seahawks shouldn't have been in the Super Bowl, or, well, if Peyton Manning would have had a better game, it would have been different. I think the Seahawks still don't really get the credit that they deserve for their success last season, for one of the biggest blowouts in Super Bowl history. So they've still got a chip on their shoulder. Winning their first Super Bowl in franchise history, they still have something to prove this year. So I absolutely agree with that. I think, yeah, if you're the best team, give them the toughest schedule because, if you're the best team, you should have the best chance to win those games. So, yeah, I absolutely agree.
Last two questions. First one, season prediction for the Seahawks. How many wins do you think they're going to get at the end?
I'm going to say they finish the season either 12-4 or 13-3. If I have to pick one, if you're going to make me pick one, I'm going to say 12-4 is probably my prediction.
Is Green Bay and Denver in the loss column, or are they in the win column?
Yeah.
Throwing a stinker at you there.
Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna put both of them in the win column. I can't see the Seahawks losing their home opener, and really, I think if they play the way they do in the Super Bowl, I don't think they're gonna blow out the Broncos, when they play them, but they still should win that game. I'm looking more at, I think, a road game in Philly, or even a road game against the Panthers. Those might be two that surprise you as, the Seahawks have a chance of losing those games just because they're on the road. Those are tough teams to beat at home. And then I'm expecting the Seahawks to lose probably 2 games against their division opponents, probably one against the 49ers, and then one against either the Cardinals or the Rams, either one. It just depends on where they are in the season. So yeah, I would say 12-4 is how they're going to finish.
And the last question I've got for you. I just had to sit through this past Sunday one of the worst things that any fan has to sit through. Watching your team win a title, then go far into the playoffs and not repeat.
Yeah.
What are your chances for the Seahawks to repeat as Super Bowl champions?
If the Seahawks can beat the 49ers and prove that they have control of that division, I'm expecting the Seahawks to meet the 49ers again in the postseason, depending on where that game is. I really think that the 49ers win the division and the Seahawks visit the 49ers in the postseason, that's going to be a very difficult game to win. So I think as long as the Seahawks can clinch home field advantage the way they did this last season, they have a great chance of making it back to the Super Bowl. if they have to play in a wild card game, or if they're on the road throughout the playoffs, I think their chances decrease significantly. So I would say 85% chance they make it back to the Super Bowl.
An 85% chance that they repeat. First time since, I believe, Tom Brady and his boys were the last ones to repeat.
Yep, absolutely. Got to have faith in your team, Ricky.
Oh, yeah, you do. You don't have to tell me. I'm a Vikings fan.
I respect that.
But I'd like to thank you, Mitch, for coming on and joining me, talking a little Seahawks. You did a lot better of a job than I would have done solo.
Well, thank you, Ricky. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
No problem. And for all you guys watching out there in the YouTube sphere, tell us what you think down below. What do you think the Seahawks are going to do this year? What did you think about what I said? More what Mitch said, because he was providing all the content in this video. And as always, have a good day, everybody.